The road was supposed to be silent, private, a stretch of pavement most people didn't even know existed, a shortcut that wound along the city's forgotten edge, where construction projects got abandoned and streetlights flickered more out of habit than function. For a man like Soren Vale, it was the perfect detour after a night filled with small talk, artificial smiles, and high-gloss conversations. He didn't want to be seen anymore. Not tonight. The rain had started lightly, as if testing its own courage. He barely noticed it at first, until the dashboard lit up like a warning sign he couldn't ignore. The steering stiffened. A slow beep echoed in the cabin, followed by an abrupt halt. His car, a machine valued at more than most people's homes, sat useless under the faint glow of a broken lamppost. He stepped out. Just like that, the billionaire became a man stuck in the rain, waiting on nothing but the quiet. Most people don't remember the strangers they pass in the rain. A flash of a face, a quick glance, a shared silence at a traffic light or bus stop. It's easy to let moments slip when the world's moving fast and everyone's too busy just trying to get somewhere. But sometimes, once in a rare while, you meet someone in the kind of place that doesn't make sense. A gas station at midnight, an empty hallway, a broken-down car on a rainy street. And they stay, not because they tried to, not because they asked to, but because something about them felt familiar, even if you didn't know their name. A certain calm in their voice, the way they didn't flinch, the way they saw you, really saw you, when no one else was looking. Some people pass through, others settle in your mind like they've always lived there. Some moments arrive quietly, no warning, no grand announcement. They slip into your life dressed like inconvenience, a delay, a problem, a night that didn't go as planned. You think they're temporary, something to get through, something to forget once it's over. But what if that moment wasn't an interruption at all? What if it was a turning point? What if the smallest interaction, the shortest conversation, the briefest exchange of trust was the beginning of a path neither person could see yet? A path that didn't care about money, status, or where either of them slept at night. Because sometimes the things that change us most don't arrive with certainty. They arrive with questions, with rain, with a choice made in seconds that echoes far longer than expected. And once that door opens, there's no closing it the same way again. It's easy to think we know what we'd do. We all like to believe we'd be kind, generous, helpful, no matter who stood in front of us. But what if the man asking for help was the face of everything that's let you down? Privilege, power, a world that never looked your way until it needed something. Would you still help him? Would you hand over your one dry hoodie, your only snack, your quiet expertise, knowing he might drive off and forget your name? Or would you walk away, just like the world has done to you over and over again? This story doesn't begin in a mansion. It begins on wet pavement, under a tired street lamp, with a girl who's lost more than most, and a man who's about to learn that not all heroes wear suits. Not every love story begins with a spark. Some start with a flat battery, a stranger in the rain, and a quiet moment that no one else noticed. But what happens next, how that moment stretches, breaks, rebuilds, might stay with you. Because this isn't just about a girl who fixed a billionaire's car. It's about the weight people carry when they think no one sees them. It's about learning to look past the exterior, past wealth, past assumptions, past shame, and choosing to see a person for who they truly are. So if you've ever wished someone would believe in you, if you've ever looked at someone and thought, they're more than what they appear, this story is for you. Drop a comment, hit like, subscribe, because sometimes the right story finds us at just the right time. The gala had been a blur of tuxedos and polished speeches. Soren Vale had shaken more hands than he could count, smiled at people he didn't trust, and nodded through conversations that barely touched the surface. He'd stood at the center of the ballroom, the golden boy of tech innovation, the man whose software had just secured another multi-million-dollar deal. But none of it meant much, as he stepped into his electric coupe and loosened the knot in his tie. He wasn't in the mood to take the main road back to the city. Instead, he followed an alternate route, a side street that curved around the edge of downtown, quiet and mostly deserted at night. The kind of place no one expected to find someone like him. That suited him fine. He didn't feel like being seen. The rain had started soft, just a drizzle, tapping gently on the windshield. But as the city lights dimmed behind him and the last of the apartment towers faded in his rearview mirror, the drizzle turned into something steadier. The road grew slick. The air felt colder. And then it happened. The dashboard blinked, once, then twice, before a red symbol flared. Soren frowned. He tapped the console, but the controls froze. The car coasted forward for a few seconds before lurching to a complete stop. He cursed under his breath and popped the door open. Rain met him instantly, cool and insistent. He grabbed his blazer from the passenger seat and held it over his head as he stepped out. Nothing around, no traffic, no buildings in sight. Just a stretch of cracked pavement, a flickering street lamp in the distance, and the hum of distant tires on roads far more important than this one. He opened the hood out of instinct, though he barely knew what he was looking for. The inside was a maze of smooth black plastic and circuits. No place for a quick fix. No signal. Of course. He leaned against the front of the car, feeling the drizzle soak into his shirt collar. The irony wasn't lost on him. A man worth billions, trapped by a machine he didn't understand. On a road no one would think to check. He wasn't used to being this helpless. And the night was just beginning. Soren pushed off the hood and scanned the road again. Still no cars. Still no movement, except the way the rain danced in the glow of the flickering street lamp. He was reaching for the door handle to sit back inside when he heard it. Footsteps. Not hurried, not afraid. Just there, steady, soft rubber soles pressing into puddles. He turned quickly. A figure had appeared, just a few yards away. At first, all he could make out was the outline, lean frame, heavy, coat, hood drawn forward, strands of damp hair stuck to her cheek. She didn't approach immediately, just stood there, like she'd been watching for a while. "You stranded?" she asked, voice low and direct. Not friendly, not hostile, just plain spoken. Soren blinked, surprised. He hadn't heard her coming. "Yeah. Car cut out on me. I think it's the battery system." She walked a bit closer, still cautious, but not uncertain. Rain rolled off her oversized coat like it had been through storms before. Her jeans were faded, shoes worn flat, the kind you don't buy. They find you. "You driving a Voltic Series S?" she asked, eyeing the hood. He raised a brow. "Yeah." She gave a single nod. "Pop the hood." There was no hesitation in her tone. No request. Just quiet command, like she'd done this before. Like his car was just another puzzle waiting to be solved. He studied her face in the dim light. She didn't flinch under his gaze. In fact, she barely acknowledged it. Her attention had already shifted, to the car, to the problem. She wasn't trying to charm him, wasn't trying to make small talk. She was soaked, shivering slightly, but her hands were already pulling her sleeves back as she leaned over the engine bay. "Elira," she mumbled, not looking at him. "Used to fix up junkyard stuff before. Things changed." He didn't ask what had changed. Something about her presence settled into the moment. She didn't belong on that road any more than he did, but she didn't seem out of place either. Like the street had made room for her. Like the rain had learned not to question her. She pressed a palm against a junction box, fingers brushing over exposed coils with practiced familiarity. Soren stepped back, watching her work. He was no longer the most capable person on that road. Soren shifted his weight from one foot to the other, water pooling around his shoes. He wasn't used to standing still while someone else took charge, not in a meeting, not in a negotiation, and definitely not on the side of a road. He cleared his throat. "You sure you know what you're doing?" Elira didn't look up. "I know this car model. Company cut costs on the internal power modulator. Same glitch happened at the garage where I used to work. You reset the system wrong, it shuts the whole thing down." He blinked. "And how do you know that?" She gave a soft, almost imperceptible shrug. "I read things." There was something oddly disarming about her, the calm way she spoke, the certainty in her movements. Her fingers moved quickly, carefully, brushing water from a connector before reaching into her coat pocket. To his surprise, she pulled out a metal hairpin, straightened it in one quick motion. "Wait," he said. "You're not actually going to—" She inserted it into the fuse relay box like she'd done it 100 times. "I'm improvising. You want to sit here all night, or you want this thing to start?" He held up both hands, as if surrendering. "All right. You're the mechanic." "Didn't say I was," she replied. "Just better than watching you stare at it like it'll fix itself." He let out a short laugh. "You've got a sharp mouth." She glanced at him for the first time. Her eyes were dark, unreadable, but not cold. "You've got a fancy car. We all have something." He smirked. "Touché." For a moment, the only sound between them was the rain ticking against the car's body. Soren studied her again, noticing the way her hands trembled slightly from the cold, but never missed a beat. She wasn't trying to impress him. In fact, she barely seemed to care who he was. That, more than anything, caught him off guard. He was used to attention, to admiration, but here was someone knee-deep in rainwater, elbow-deep in wires, and completely unimpressed. Somehow, that made him want to know more. Elira adjusted the pin once more, pressing it into the slot like she knew exactly how much pressure it could take. She paused, glanced at the dash through the window, then looked back at the open hood. "Try the ignition," she said, stepping back without a hint of uncertainty. Soren hesitated, still half expecting the car to spark or die completely. But he circled back to the driver's side and slipped into the seat. The rain beat harder now, drumming against the windshield as if it too was waiting. He tapped the button. For a breath, nothing happened. Then, with a low hum, the lights came on. The system rebooted. Dashboard indicators cycled through diagnostics. The car was alive. He let out a quiet laugh, partly in disbelief. "You've got to be kidding me." Elira closed the hood with a heavy thud, already backing away. "It's not a permanent fix," she called out, brushing rain from her sleeves. "But it'll get you where you need to go." Soren stepped out again. "Seriously, how did you even—" She was already turning, pulling her hood up again. "Years of dealing with broken things. You pick up a few tricks." He moved to follow her, unsure if he was supposed to say more. "Where are you headed?" "I can give you a ride." "No need. It's pouring. I've walked through worse." There was no bitterness in her voice, just fact, the kind that didn't invite sympathy or negotiation. She kept walking. "At least let me pay you," he offered. She stopped, turned halfway, not looking for handouts. "I didn't say it was a handout." She gave a half smile, not unfriendly but unreadable. "I just like fixing things." And with that, she slipped into the mist. The rain swallowed her shape almost immediately, leaving Soren standing there, unsure why he suddenly felt so ridiculous with his fancy car and soaked shoes. It had all happened so fast, he barely knew her name, yet the air felt emptier without her. He glanced back at the hood. Closed. Fixed. But somehow, the problem wasn't mechanical anymore. It was the question that lingered. Who was she? "Wait," he called out, voice louder than he intended. Elira paused just before the sidewalk curved out of view. She didn't turn fully, just shifted her weight, half facing him under the dim light. The rain had softened again, not quite stopping, just enough to blur the edges of everything. Soren opened the glove compartment and fished out the only thing remotely useful, a half-melted protein bar he hadn't eaten since the last late night at the office. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a sleek black card, his contact number scrawled hastily across the back in silver ink. He jogged up to her and held them both out. "Here," he said, slightly breathless. "You fixed my night. If you ever need real help or just someone who'll actually listen, call." She took the bar first, flipping it once in her hand. Then the card. No thanks, no awkward gratitude, just a simple nod, almost like an agreement. He watched her tuck the card into her pocket like it was nothing. But something told him she wasn't the type to take anything lightly. "I'm Soren, by the way," he added. "A little late." "Yeah," she said, without sarcasm or awe. "I figured." And just like that, she turned and walked away, disappearing again into a world he couldn't see. The moment felt like a scene that should have had more closure, more lines, more time. But it didn't. He stood there a few seconds longer than necessary before climbing back into the car. The dashboard was normal now, steady green across the screen. But his mind wasn't. He drove back to the city on autopilot, the road slick beneath the tires, the rain still whispering across the roof. Music played faintly through the speakers, but he barely heard it. Her voice echoed louder. Not the words exactly, but the tone. Confident, distant, and something else, familiar, though he couldn't explain why. Back at his penthouse, he sat in silence for longer than he liked to admit, staring out. The floor-to-ceiling windows, the city stretching beneath him like a glittering map. She didn't ask for anything, not even a name. Still, she'd taken space in his head like she owned it. It started with the smell of rain on metal. A few days after the encounter, Soren was driving through the city when the scent caught him off guard. Just moisture on pavement, common enough. But it pulled him back to that night instantly. To the chill in the air, to her hands brushing over the engine, to the way she never asked for anything, the way she disappeared. He'd met thousands of people, shaken hands with presidents, partnered with CEOs, flown to conferences across continents, but none of them had ever left the kind of silence Alira did, the kind that echoed instead of fading. He told himself it was curiosity, that was all, just wondering where she came from, how she knew that fix, what she was doing alone near an underpass. But deep down, he knew better. Late at night, when the meetings ended and the city grew quiet, his mind would go right back to her soaked hoodie, calm voice, that faint smirk when she told him she just liked fixing things. He replayed the way she held the hairpin, how her hands barely trembled even in the cold. The conviction in her voice. She didn't talk like someone looking to be noticed. She talked like someone used to being ignored and no longer bothered by it. The memory came in fragments, the press of her fingertips against the fuse, the way she said, "People like me don't ask for rides," the brief flash of vulnerability in her eyes, gone as quickly as it came. He couldn't explain it, not to himself, not to anyone else. But the truth was simple. He wanted to see her again, not to repay her, not to help her. He just wanted her to exist in his world a little longer. It didn't make sense. She didn't make sense. She didn't fit the profile of anyone he kept around. No polished resume, no social capital, no benefit to his brand. And yet, for reasons he couldn't fully name, she'd made everything else feel less important. Even his sleep, even his logic, even his carefully built life. The next morning, before his coffee even cooled, Soren reached for his phone and pulled up the number he'd written on the back of the card. He stared at it for a moment, thumb hovering over the call button. This was ridiculous. She probably tossed the card, or maybe she never meant to use it. Still, he pressed it. A soft chime, then silence. The call didn't go through. He tried again. Nothing. It wasn't just unanswered. It was disconnected. He stared at the screen, frustration tightening in his chest. The number wasn't fake. He'd written it himself. But something about her told him she didn't plan to use it, no matter how real it was. That should have been the end of it. He could have taken the hint, let the mystery fade. But he didn't. That evening, he drove back to the same underpass. Rain hadn't returned, but the air was thick with leftover dampness, the kind that never fully leaves the concrete. He slowed near the same spot his car had stalled, scanning the sidewalk, the dark corners where shadows hung like old coats. Nothing. No sign of Alira. No trace she'd ever been there. He returned the next day, and the day after that, sometimes at dusk, sometimes before dawn. Different hours, same result. He even stopped by a soup kitchen 3 blocks over, posing as someone scouting locations for a donation campaign. No one recognized the name Elira. When he described her, quiet girl, sharp, about his age, likely on foot, one of the volunteers just shook their head. "Most people don't use names here," the man said. "Some do. Most don't." Back in the car, Soren sat with the engine running, hand on the wheel, not going anywhere. He wasn't used to chasing things. People usually came to him. Investors, journalists, partners, even the rare friend. But not her. Elira had slipped into his night like an answer to a question he hadn't known to ask, and now she was gone. But something in him refused to accept that was the end of it. She was out there, somewhere, and he wasn't ready to stop looking. The boardroom was full, but Soren didn't notice. He sat at the head of a long glass table, sleeves rolled up, collar loosened just enough to seem human. Around him, his executive team ran through quarterly reports, projections, investor updates, and product milestones. Someone mentioned a merger opportunity. Someone else was celebrating a spike in user acquisition. He nodded at the right times, offered brief remarks, approved budgets, declined 2 proposals. But his mind? Not there. He kept seeing the way Elira turned down his offer for a ride, the way she pocketed the card without reacting to his name, the calm, unshaken way she walked into the mist, like she knew she belonged to it more than any office ever could. That haunted him, because in Soren's world, no one walked away. Not like that. He'd built a life where people ran toward him, eager, expectant, often, pretending not to be impressed while clearly hoping to impress him. But Elira? She hadn't just walked away. She made it feel like she chose the silence over anything he could have offered. And now, that silence followed him everywhere. In the elevator mirrors, in the flashes of camera phones when he stepped out of his car, in the taste of his morning espresso, which suddenly felt weaker than he remembered. He caught himself checking faces in crowds, scanning pedestrians from tinted windows, asking his assistant vague questions about local non-profits and street-level initiatives just for insight. Everything around him continued. The stock value climbed. The media buzzed. The next product was ahead of schedule, but Soren felt disconnected from it all, like someone had rewired his focus and thrown away the manual. One night, during a gala dinner meant to celebrate a major acquisition, a donor's daughter leaned across the table and said, "You seem distracted. Everything okay?" He smiled politely. "Yeah, just tired." But he wasn't tired. He was searching. And it was starting to show, because no matter how much success surrounded him, something was missing. Something real, unscripted, unpolished, something that had walked into his night like a question and left without an answer. The event wasn't his idea. His company had partnered with a community center in the South Quarter to sponsor a weekend breakfast program, part of a PR campaign crafted by his communications team. Visible impact, they called it. Grassroots engagement. Soren hadn't planned to attend. But something in him, it wasn't obligation exactly, more like instinct, urged him to show up. He arrived early. No camera crews, no reporters, just a few volunteers setting up folding tables and stacking styrofoam cups beside gallon jugs of orange juice. He stood quietly near the back, unsure what he was even looking for. And then he saw her. Hair tied up in a loose knot, sleeves rolled to her elbows. Her coat was different, thinner, less soaked through, but her eyes were unmistakable, steady, alert, a little softer than before. She was pouring coffee into chipped cups, laughing softly at something an elderly woman had said. It was the first time he'd seen her smile, really smile, and it knocked the breath out of him. He didn't move at first, just watched. She wasn't performing, wasn't trying to be seen. She was just there, present, real. Finally, he stepped forward, not too fast, not too slow. She looked up as he approached, no surprise on her face, just a calm recognition, like she'd been expecting this eventually. "You again," she said. Soren smiled, hands in his pockets. "You didn't call." She gestured to the coffee pot. "Been a little busy." He nodded. "You work here?" "Volunteer." They let me help out. Meals in exchange for service. I pour, mop, stock the pantry. Fair trade. There was no trace of shame in her voice. If anything, she sounded settled, like she'd made peace with the rhythm of her days. "I didn't think I'd see you again," he said. "I wasn't sure you'd look." "I did." She held his gaze for a moment, then looked away. Why? He didn't have an answer ready, not one that would make sense outside his own head. So instead he asked, "You free for lunch?" She raised an eyebrow. "No offense, but last time we spoke, your car almost betrayed you." "Fair point." She gave a small grin. "But I could do a walk." They stepped outside the center, the morning air still holding the weight of the earlier chill. The city hadn't fully woken up yet. Sidewalks were mostly empty, save for a few early risers and delivery bikes zipping past. Soren walked beside her in silence for a bit, not pressing, not performing, just walking. Elira sipped the last of her own coffee from a paper cup, held it for a while, then tossed it into a rusted bin without missing stride. "So, what brings the billionaire back to street level?" she asked, not accusatory, just curious. He glanced over. "Honestly?" "You." She stopped. Not dramatically, just a beat in the movement. "Why?" "You looked at me and didn't blink," he said simply. "You fixed my car, turned down my money, and walked away. That doesn't happen in my world. That's not enough reason to find someone." He nodded. "Maybe, but I haven't been able to stop thinking about that night. About you." Her face tightened slightly. Not rejection, not fear, something more complicated. Something like resistance built from experience. She sighed, eyes on the cracked pavement beneath their feet. "Most people only notice people like me when they're trying to feel generous or guilty. I'm not here to be either." She looked at him then, searching for signs of condescension, of performance. She didn't find any. He added, "I'm not offering a check or a rescue." She smirked faintly. "Good. I don't do rescue stories." A breeze cut through the street. She pulled her coat tighter, then relaxed her shoulders. "I volunteer here most mornings," she said quietly. "Gives me structure, purpose, and a hot meal. No shame in that." "There's never shame in surviving," she replied. That silence returned, but this time it didn't feel empty. It felt steady. They reached the park entrance just ahead, where trees stretched toward the clouded sky and a narrow path snaked along the edge of a small duck pond. "I like this place," she said. "Quiet. No eyes watching. No headlines either," he added. She smiled. Exactly. They kept walking, not because they needed to, but because neither of them wanted the conversation to end. The path curved gently through the park, shaded by trees just beginning to bud. There was still a bite in the air, but the breeze was light, steady, enough to make Elira tuck her hands in her coat pockets as they walked. They didn't speak at first, not because there was nothing to say, but because silence didn't feel like a stranger anymore. It felt earned. Soren glanced at her from time to time, but she didn't seem in a rush to break the quiet. She walked like someone used to watching for the unexpected, light on her feet, aware of exits. He waited. Eventually, she said, "You ever feel like you're performing a version of yourself just to make everyone else comfortable?" He looked over, surprised by the question's weight. "All the time," he admitted. She nodded slowly. "I used to think it was just me. What version of you is this, then?" he asked. She shrugged, the one that still remembers who she was before everything got messy. He didn't ask for details. Not yet. Instead, he offered his own. "People think I've got everything figured out. I let them think that. Easier that way. But the truth is, I feel like I built a whole empire just to make up for something I can't name." She glanced at him then, brows slightly raised. "And you think that works?" He exhaled through his nose. For a while, they reached a bench near the pond, one of those worn wooden ones with initials carved into the side. She sat first. He joined her, leaving just enough space to respect her pace. "You ever think about what your life could have been?" she asked. "Every day," he replied. But I try not to stay there too long. Why not? Because there's no going backward, only forward. Even if it's slow, Elira looked down at her hands. Sometimes forward feels like dragging. I felt that too. She gave a quiet laugh. You? With your penthouse and your smartwatches and your board meetings. I bleed just like everyone else, he said. She tilted her head. So why are you here? He met her eyes. Because with you, I don't feel like I have to pretend. Elira didn't speak right away. Her fingers picked at a loose thread on her coat sleeve, gaze fixed on a duck drifting across the pond's surface. It wasn't the kind of silence that asked to be filled. It was the kind that had been held too long. My mom used to sew wedding dresses, she said eventually, not in some fancy boutique, just a small room behind our apartment. She made beauty out of scraps. Soren didn't respond. He simply listened. She was all hands, Elira continued, always stitching, fixing, adjusting. She could make an old curtain look like something out of a magazine. I used to sit on the floor and collect the leftover lace, made little crowns out of it. Her voice shifted, softer now. She got sick when I was 15, real sick. We didn't have insurance. The bills started piling up. She kept working as long as she could. Said she didn't want me to remember her as someone lying in bed. He heard the way her breath caught, just slightly, before she went on. She passed in the middle of winter, snow everywhere, cold inside the house too. I still remember the silence after. Not peaceful, just empty. She looked at him then. That's when my stepfather started drinking heavier. He already had the habit, but after she was gone, there was no one left to soften him. Soren's jaw tensed, but he didn't interrupt. He didn't hit me, she clarified quickly. But there are other kinds of bruises, the kind that make you feel like a burden just for breathing. She sat back, blinking away something he pretended not to see. I got a partial scholarship to a state school, mechanical engineering. I was good, top of my class, but I had to work to stay afloat. Grocery clerk, campus maintenance, anything I could grab. My stepfather stopped helping entirely, said I needed to learn how life really worked. What happened? Soren asked gently. She looked down. Life caught up. Rent was due. One missed exam turned into a warning. Then probation. Then she trailed off. You dropped out, he said softly. I disappeared, she corrected. And for the first time, he saw not just a survivor, but a woman still holding pieces of herself together, one thread at a time. Soren didn't rush to respond. He didn't offer platitudes, didn't reach for something clever to say. He just let the silence stretch between them, the kind that didn't feel awkward, just honest. Elira leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on her knees, watching the water ripple near the edge of the pond. There was a stiffness in her shoulders, the kind that comes from holding too much for too long. But she hadn't flinched while telling her story, not once. She'd laid it out like a blueprint, each broken part, each missing piece, with the matter-of-factness of someone who stopped expecting rescue a long time ago. And he sat with it, not as someone trying to fix it, but as someone willing to hear it. I used to think success was about building something no one could take away, he finally said, voice low. But now I think, maybe it's about who you are when everything's already been taken. She looked at him, eyes narrowing, not in suspicion but in curiosity, like she wasn't used to men who sat in silence after hearing something hard. You're not trying to solve me, she said. No. You're not scared off. No. Why? He paused. Because when you were talking, I wasn't thinking about how sad it was. I was thinking about how strong you had to be just to sit here and tell it. She blinked. A slow, measured response, not emotional, just present. I've had friends who disappeared the second I stopped smiling, she admitted. People who said they cared until it got messy. I don't scare easy. She leaned back against the bench, one arm stretching across the top slat. That sounds like something a man says when he's about to prove the opposite. Maybe. But I'm still here. Another pause. Most people talk too much, she said. They fill every inch of air with noise. You don't. He looked at her. That's because I don't want to miss anything. There was a softness in the way she looked away after that. Not fragile, just thoughtful. She didn't say thank you. He didn't expect her to. Sometimes, the deepest conversations are the ones where most of the words go unspoken. They continued walking after a while, drifting past benches and patches of clover that had fought their way through cracks in the concrete. The conversation had softened, not lighter exactly, but warmer. Soren kept stealing glances at her, noticing things he hadn't before. The way she scanned her surroundings, always watching. The habit of pulling her sleeves down just past her wrists. The way she didn't waste words. As they reached a quieter stretch of the park, he stopped. "Elira," he said, tone careful. She turned to face him. "I've been thinking about something," he began. "And I want to say it the right way, because I don't want it to sound like pity." Her eyes sharpened slightly. "Not defensive, just alert. I run a tech firm. We're not just software anymore. We're expanding into systems repair, hardware diagnostics, building scalable teams that know how to look at something that's broken and find what's still useful underneath." She didn't speak, just waited. "I want you to come in. As a contractor first, if you prefer it that way. I can put you on a project with our systems engineers, hands-on, real work, no press, no charity, just you doing what you clearly already know how to do." She blinked. Slowly. "You're offering me a job?" "I'm offering you a shot," he said. "One you've already earned. I just have the key to the door." She folded her arms. "Because I fixed your car?" He shook his head. "Because you fixed it like it was nothing. Because you stayed calm when you didn't have to. Because you didn't look at a billion-dollar engine and freeze." Her eyes searched his, still guarded. "Is this going to be a headline?" she asked. "Are you going to turn me into a story?" "No," he replied. "Only if you want one." She exhaled sharply. "You know, people like me don't usually get invitations like this." He nodded. "That's the problem." She stared at him for a long time, the kind of stare that weighed motives, history, power. And then she said, "You're serious?" "I am." 3 days passed before Soren heard anything. He didn't call, didn't text. He'd given her the address, a time, a point of contact, but he left the rest to her. Monday morning arrived cloudy, with just enough chill to make people zip up their jackets a little higher. The office buzzed with routine, bad coffee, inbox overload, meetings queued back to back. No one expected anything unusual, until the elevator opened on the 6th floor. Elira stepped in quietly. No dramatic entrance, no designer makeover. She wore dark jeans, a plain shirt, and the same pair of boots he remembered. Her hair was tied back. No makeup, no announcements, just presence. She walked to the reception desk with a small folder tucked under her arm. Her posture was straight, but her fingers clenched the folder just a little too tight. The receptionist looked up. "Can I help you?" Elira cleared her throat. "I'm here for the onboarding. Contract team." The woman scanned the schedule. "Name?" "Elira." That was all she said. That was all she needed to. Soren didn't hear about it until 20 minutes later, when his assistant poked her head into the conference room and whispered, "She's here." He didn't smile. Not outwardly, but something in his chest settled. Downstairs, Elira was being walked through orientation. Badges, keycard access, coffee machines. A junior team lead offered to show her around. She nodded along, said little, observed everything. By noon, she was sitting in a workspace near the diagnostics team, headphones on, already scanning through a backlog of flagged system errors. She didn't ask for help, didn't try to impress. She just worked. That afternoon, she flagged a bug in the firmware the in-house team had overlooked for 6 weeks. She didn't brag, just sent the fix upstream and returned to the next item on the list. No one clapped. No one made a scene. But the engineers started whispering. By the end of the day, the whispers stopped. She wasn't the girl from the street anymore. She was the girl who solved the problem. The office wasn't designed to be intimidating, but it was. Clean white floors, frosted glass partitions, walls that changed colors depending on the time of day. Everything was smooth, efficient, surgically precise. Even the air smelled like filtered ambition. Elira walked in like someone who already knew she didn't belong. Not because anyone told her. They didn't need to. Their eyes said it all. She wore the same pair of worn boots. Her jeans were clean but faded. She had a plain canvas bag over one shoulder, and her hair pulled back in a loose bun. No click of heels, no power blazer, just her. The hallway quieted a little as she passed. Someone whispered near the espresso machine. Another leaned into a cubicle to pass a comment that ended in a short laugh. But no one said anything to her directly. Not yet. She followed the junior team lead down the corridor, nodding as he rattled off features of the workspace: biometric check-ins, noise-filtering headphones, touch-responsive desks. He was polite, maybe even well-meaning, but there was a strain in his voice, like he was explaining the building to someone who might not stay long. Her desk was near the center of the diagnostics room. Desk 17. It was clean, neutral, impersonal, the same as the rest. Elira sat down, took a breath, and unpacked her things. Just a small notebook, a pair of cheap earbuds, and a pen with someone else's company logo on it. Around her, people continued working, but their attention never fully left her. Not in a cruel way. Not yet. Just with that quiet calculation reserved for someone who didn't come in through the usual doors. She didn't blame them. This wasn't a world that expected someone like her. Not in boots with cracked soles. Not without a degree or a LinkedIn presence polished by a marketing team. She wasn't supposed to get this far. So she stayed quiet. No smiles, no small talk, no explanations. She turned on her monitor, logged in with the credentials they'd given her, and started reading through the backlog. A bug report, another and another, lines of code, notes from engineers, a string of complaints about a system crash that hadn't been solved since rollout. She leaned forward, screen glowing against her face. The stares faded slowly, not because people stopped watching, but because they didn't know what they were watching yet. But she did. She didn't need to explain herself. She just needed to fix something. By midday, Elira had already combed through 5 system logs and flagged 2 recurring errors no one had addressed properly. But it was the 6th file that stopped her. A firmware glitch buried deep in the diagnostics stream. Not a crash. Something more frustrating. An intermittent error that caused devices to freeze for a few seconds during high-load operations. Annoying. Elusive. Expensive. It had been marked under review for 6 weeks. The notes were long. Engineers had tried patches. One even rewrote an entire module. Nothing stuck. Elira read everything twice. Then she read it again, but slower. There it was. A misalignment in the power usage cascade. Not constant. Just enough to cause a bottleneck when paired with a specific user. Behavior. A rare combination of commands that overloaded the queue. The system choked on itself. That was the freeze. She leaned back, took a breath, then went to work. No announcement, no calls for assistance, just quiet typing. Short bursts of code, one line here, a shift there. She restructured the trigger logic and cleaned up a sequence loop that had been ignored during optimization. Then she tested it locally. No freeze. Once, twice, 10 times. She submitted the patch into the system with a short note. Error traced to trigger queue cascade. Logic simplified. Freeze resolved under test. Then she shut her screen off and walked to the break room for a cup of water. By the time she returned, her terminal had 5 notifications. 1 from a senior engineer, 1 from the diagnostics team lead, and 3 from engineers she hadn't met yet. The messages were short, clipped, and progressively more urgent. Is this a working patch? You actually traced the cascade? No way. Tested it here. Confirming. Freeze is gone. Who are you? She didn't respond. She just turned her screen back on and started reading the next report. By 3 p.m., someone from software architecture walked over to her desk. A man in his late 30s, grey cardigan, skeptical eyes. You wrote the patch for ticket 1418? She nodded. Yes. He hesitated, then said, Nice work. That issue was bleeding time off every system it touched. Then it needed to be fixed. He blinked. Right. Well, welcome to the team. She gave a small nod. Thanks. By the end of the day, the stares had changed. They weren't curious anymore. They were careful. Because now they understood. She wasn't here by accident. Lunch wasn't planned. It never was. The first time, it happened because Elira had forgotten hers. Or maybe she hadn't forgotten. Maybe she just didn't have anything to bring. Either way, Soren noticed. He didn't ask. Just slid a boxed meal across the rooftop table without a word. She eyed it, then him. What's this? Leftovers from the investor meeting. Better than it looks. She opened it. You always eat in silence. I don't force conversations. She smirked. Good. The next time, she brought her own. Sat beside him without waiting for permission. They shared a bag of dried mangoes and didn't speak for 10 whole minutes. It was the most restful break Soren had taken all month. Their lunches became regular, not scheduled. Just understood. Over time, things grew less quiet. He introduced her to his favorite lo-fi playlist, tracks he used to calm his mind before product launches. She made a face at the first song. You listen to this? It helps me think. Sounds like elevator music for overachievers. He laughed. That's exactly what it is. She countered with her own mix, mostly acoustic, some folk, a little bit of old-school soul. He was skeptical, then surprised, then completely hooked. By the third week, they started walking home together after late nights. His car followed them slowly from a block away, driven by his driver, who didn't complain. They didn't always talk. Some evenings were spent pointing out broken gutters and sidewalk chalk drawings. Other nights they swapped stories, some funny, some dark, some raw. He told her about boarding school, about growing up in mansions, but never hearing anyone say they were proud of him. About how winning became a replacement for affection. About how the higher he climbed, the lonelier the view became. She didn't interrupt, just walked beside him. When she finally spoke, it was about the first time she slept in a public library. How she chose the back staircase, because the motion sensors didn't reach that far. How she memorized staff schedules so she wouldn't be seen. I read books until I passed out, she said. It was the safest place I knew. Soren didn't reply. He just handed her the extra hoodie he kept folded in his bag. She wore it without a word. There was no label on what they were, no plans, no pressure, just a growing comfort in each other's company, an understanding that, somehow, two people from opposite worlds had found something steady in the space between. It was the kind of evening that didn't ask for attention, no thunder, no wind, just a slow, quiet rain that painted the sidewalks with silver and blurred the edges of buildings. Streetlights hummed, cars hissed by, people hurried under umbrellas, but Soren and Elira didn't. They were walking the same path they always did, cutting through the small park. Near her temporary shelter, his driver trailing discreetly behind them. She wore the hoodie he'd given her again, though the sleeves were now rolled up and flecked with ink from a whiteboard session that had stretched late into the night. Soren didn't speak much that evening. Neither did she. Sometimes silence between them felt like dialogue in another language, one that didn't require translation. The rain picked up slightly, just enough to bead on their lashes and soak through the thinner parts of her coat. She pulled the hood over her head and glanced at him. Your hair's starting to collapse, she said. He ran a hand through it. It's not built for weather. She gave a faint grin. Neither am I. They slowed near the footbridge that crossed the narrow stream. A low-hanging tree arched overhead, its leaves dripping with rhythm. Soren paused beneath it. Elira joined him, breath visible in the soft chill. I keep thinking this is all temporary, she said. Like one day I'll wake up and it'll all disappear. The desk, the work. I know the feeling, he replied. I've built so much around me, and sometimes I still don't trust that any of it's real. She looked up at him, water clinging to her lashes. You trust me? Yes. Why? Because you show up. That caught her off guard. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. Her hand tightened around the strap of her bag. He reached out, not suddenly, not dramatically, just enough to tuck a damp strand of hair behind her ear. Her eyes didn't leave his. "I don't want to ruin this," she whispered. "You won't." The kiss wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't urgent. It came slowly, like the rain itself. Quiet, certain, necessary. Her lips brushed his, like a question she'd been holding for days. He answered it without saying a word. And for a few seconds, everything around them, cars, lights, the weight of the world, stood still. When they pulled apart, she didn't smile. Neither did he. They just looked at each other like something had shifted, gently, permanently. The rain kept falling, but this time, neither of them minded. They stayed under the tree for a while, saying nothing. The kiss hadn't solved anything. It hadn't swept away the past or healed old wounds. But it did something else. It opened a space, one where neither of them had to hide. Eventually, Elira stepped back and pulled the hood off her head. Rain clung to her cheeks, mixing with whatever emotion hadn't fully surfaced yet. She folded her arms, not from cold, but from instinct. That was probably a mistake. Soren didn't flinch. "Do you really think that?" "I think—" She paused, struggling for the right words. "I think I'm used to things breaking when they start to matter." He nodded slowly. "You're not the only one." Her voice tightened. "I don't want to be someone you fix." "You're not. Then why are you here?" she asked, more earnest than angry. "Because I see what you can't." She looked at him, wary. "You walk into rooms and change them," he continued. "Not by demanding attention, not by trying to impress anyone. You just know what's broken and how to make it better, whether it's a circuit board or a team dynamic or a moment between two people." She swallowed, but didn't speak. "You don't need saving," he said. "But you do need someone to remind you you're not invisible." Her gaze dropped to the ground. He stepped closer, not to close the space out of desire, but to offer safety in it. "I need you to believe in you too," he said quietly. "Not because I do, but because you already know how to rebuild everything else. It's time you started with yourself." A breath hitched in her throat, but she pushed it down. "You make it sound easy. It's not. And if I mess it up, then you get to try again. That's what belief is." She looked up at him. This time, her eyes weren't guarded. They were open, vulnerable in a way that had nothing to do with weakness. He didn't reach for her. She reached for him. Her hand landed gently on his chest, fingers curling into the fabric of his shirt. She leaned forward, not hesitant now, but present. "Sure." Their lips met again. Slower, warmer, the kind of kiss that asked no questions but answered all the ones they hadn't dared to voice. When they pulled apart, she whispered, "Okay, okay? I'll try." And that was enough, because belief doesn't always start loud. Sometimes it begins with a whisper, and someone who stays to hear it. It started on a Thursday, a quiet morning, just after sunrise, when the world was still deciding whether to be kind or cruel. Soren had barely stepped out of the elevator when his phone buzzed. 3 times, back to back. Urgent messages, subject lines in all caps, attachments from publicists. By the time he reached his desk, the damage had already spread. Every major tabloid was running with it. His face, her photo, splashed across thumbnails like an exposé waiting to collapse something. Billionaire's mystery intern has shocking past, from street corners to corner offices. Who is Elira? And worse, someone had leaked old photos, blurry but unmistakable. One of her sleeping under a bridge, another near a food line. An archived arrest from 3 years ago, dismissed and sealed, now front page on a gossip site that didn't care for accuracy. They twisted it, of course. Words like gold digger and hidden motives floated just beneath the surface of every caption. A girl from nowhere, a man with everything. The story practically wrote itself for people hungry for scandal. But they didn't know the truth. They didn't know about the engine on a rainy night, about her refusing money, about the hoodie she wore because she didn't own a coat thick enough for November. All they saw was contrast. All they wanted was chaos. Soren stood at the glass wall of his office, scrolling through the noise. The headlines, the manipulated photos, the comments. Cruel, careless, endless. People didn't ask who she was. They assumed. And now they were rewriting her in pixels and sound bites. He clenched his jaw. Pockets of heat rose in his chest. He wasn't angry for himself. He could handle scrutiny. He'd lived under cameras since he was 25. But Elira? She hadn't signed up for this. She hadn't chased it. She hadn't courted attention or posted a single thing online. She'd shown up, worked, walked with him in silence, shared pieces of herself when she didn't have to. And now, strangers were tearing her apart for existing in his orbit. His phone buzzed again. Press requests, interview offers, 3 PR crisis consultants already preparing drafts. But none of that mattered, because she hadn't called, and she hadn't come in that morning. She was gone. By noon, the office no longer felt like a place of work. Whispers filled the hallways, not loud enough to be caught on security feeds, but unmistakable. The kind that started with side glances and ended in long stares. Open. Screens were minimized a little slower. Slack messages moved faster than actual meetings. They all knew. The same people who had quietly observed Elira in her first week, who once dismissed her, then respected her, now talked in code over lunch and exchanged links with fake concern. Did you see the article? Do you think Soren knew? She's not even on LinkedIn. Some of it was subtle. Raised eyebrows, hushed voices, slightly forced smiles. Others were bolder. A few asked outright if she was coming back. One engineer asked if her credentials had been verified. Another joked, loud enough to be overheard, about background checks and pretty faces fixing bugs. No one said it to her face, but that didn't matter. Because Elira didn't show up. Her desk remained untouched. Headphones still coiled. Coffee mug half-washed, sitting by the corner like a placeholder. It felt strange, how fast absence can echo louder than presence. Soren walked past her desk twice that day. The first time, he pretended to be heading toward IT. The second, he stopped and looked down. A post-it note had curled at the edge, almost falling off her monitor. Just a sketch, some scribbled logic gates, a bug-tracking sequence. Nothing special, but it was hers. He returned to his office and shut the door, ignoring 2 scheduled calls and a branding meeting. His team, leads, tiptoed around the issue. One sent an email offering to address the Elira matter respectfully in upcoming HR updates. Another offered to reassign her workload as necessary. No one asked how she was doing, just how it looked. That was the difference. Soren sat at his desk, listening to the murmur through soundproof glass. Voices weren't clear, but the tone was unmistakable. Curiosity dressed up as concern. Entertainment masked as office chatter. And the worst part, none of them knew her. They hadn't seen her hands tremble when she fixed the circuit, hadn't heard her story on the park bench, hadn't watched her pause before every truth she dared to share. They didn't know Elira, but they were already turning her into something else. By Friday morning, her badge had stopped working. Security noticed first, not because of protocol, but because they liked her. She always greeted them. Quiet, polite, never in a rush. One of the guards even kept a granola bar in the desk drawer in case she skipped breakfast again. When she didn't check in, they assumed she was running late. But she didn't come at all. By the second day, her inbox bounced back replies, "User not found." Her profile on the internal team directory vanished. Not deactivated, deleted. As if she had never been there. The desk was still untouched. Her coffee mug sat in the same spot. The bug logs she had been reviewing hadn't been updated since Tuesday afternoon. No resignation email, no outburst, no goodbye. Just gone. Soren's assistant left a message that morning. She didn't formally quit, but she's unreachable. Should we send someone to follow up? He didn't answer right away. He already knew. This wasn't a retreat. It was a defense. Her disappearing act wasn't about fear. It was about control. The only control she still had. He could see her clearly in his mind, back under that overpass, or maybe ducked behind the loading dock of the community center, sitting on milk crates, hugging her knees, trying to steady her breathing. Not because she was weak, because she'd been seen in the wrong way, exposed, reduced to a headline. She had warned him, hadn't she? I don't call people who scare me. He had promised she wouldn't be a story. And still, despite everything, her life was now clickbait. Her name trending. Her past dragged through comment sections like she had something to explain. He called her twice. Straight to voicemail. The number hadn't changed this time. It just wasn't being answered. He sent one message. I'm not asking you to come back. I just want you to know, no one gets to rewrite your story but you. He didn't press send right away. Then he did. No dots, no typing bubble, no reply. The silence felt final. He looked around his office and hated it for the first time in years. All the clean lines, the glass, the polished wood, it suddenly felt like a place where truth didn't belong. He leaned back in his chair, hands steepled at his lips. She was gone. Again. But this time, it felt like something had been taken, not just lost. It was the front desk volunteer who tipped him off. Soren had driven to the community center with no plan, no press, and no security. Just his driver parked a block away, and a hope that hadn't quite given up yet. The woman at the reception desk recognized him instantly, eyes widening before softening. She didn't ask for a selfie, didn't offer a welcome speech. Instead, she tilted her head and asked, "You looking for her?" He nodded. She came back 2 days ago, quiet. Just said she needed something familiar. Soren didn't ask for details. The woman pointed toward the multi-purpose room down the hall. She's stacking pantry donations. The door creaked as he entered. Fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead. Folding tables lined the walls, topped with cardboard boxes filled with canned soup, dry cereal and toiletries. Volunteers moved around in a slow rhythm, checking expiration dates, sorting by type. And there she was, at the far end, hoodie sleeves rolled up, palms flat against a box of rice, eyes scanning the label like it was the most important thing in the world. She didn't see him at first. He watched her for a moment. How calm she looked. Not peaceful, just settled, like she'd folded herself back into this space, the way some people return to a place that never asked questions. He stepped forward, slow enough not to startle her. Elira. Her shoulders stiffened. She didn't turn around. "I thought you'd say more," she said, still facing the box. "I figured you'd heard enough noise already." She turned then. Her face was tired, not from lack of sleep, but from holding it all in. "You shouldn't be here." "I had to be. I didn't ask you to find me. I didn't ask permission," he replied gently. She looked away. "They've made a mess of me." "No," he said. "They made a mess of your name. You? You're still the same person who fixed my car in the rain with a hairpin and didn't ask for credit. That version of me didn't have photos online. That version of you still exists." She shook her head. "I embarrassed you. I gave them something to laugh at." "You didn't embarrass me. I became a liability." "No. You became real to people who couldn't handle that kind of honesty." Silence. Then he added, voice steady, "You didn't ruin anything. You reminded me why I started building in the first place." Her eyes glistened, but she blinked it away, as she always did. Soren didn't rush her. They stood in the middle of the pantry room, surrounded by boxes and fluorescent light and the quiet shuffle of volunteers who knew better than to interrupt. Elira's eyes dropped to the floor. Her fingers gripped the edge of the table like she needed something solid to hold on to. He stepped closer. "You think I care about a headline?" "You should," she said, barely above a whisper. "You have a reputation, a company, a life that's clean." He shook his head. "A life that looked clean. Until someone walked into it and reminded me what real actually means." She finally looked up. "You inspired me," he said. The words hung there. Not polished, not rehearsed, just true. "You walked into my life when I least expected it and reminded me what it looks like to show up with nothing but your mind, your grit, and your honesty. No branding, no angle. Just you. She swallowed hard. I didn't mean to become all this. I know. I didn't want the attention. I didn't want to be the reason people whispered. I get it. Then, why are you still here? Because I'm not leaving you to carry this alone. That broke something in her. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just a slow release, like a window cracking open after being shut for too long. She didn't cry. Not fully, but her lips trembled. I believed in you before the world noticed, he added. And I'll keep believing in you long after they forget. That night, he sat alone in his penthouse, staring at the statement his PR team had drafted. He deleted it, then opened a blank screen and wrote his own. There's been a lot of noise this week, so let me make something clear. Elira didn't come into my life for attention. She didn't ask for favors. She didn't chase headlines. She helped fix more than my car. She helped fix my company and my heart. You can believe the rumors, or you can believe the results. But I believe in her, and I always will. He hit post. No press release, no filters, no legal review, just the truth. Within hours, the internet lit up. Thousands of shares, comments flooding in, some skeptical, many supportive, and more than a few from people who had been quietly surviving like she had. The next morning, when Elira walked back into the office, head high, eyes steady, no one whispered. They just watched her pass and made room. Elira didn't return to the world as anyone's project. She came back as herself. There were no press conferences, no stylists, no perfectly curated posts, just a quiet reappearance that made louder noise than any dramatic re-entry ever could. The company offered to handle the fallout. Crisis communications, reputation management, social media consultants. She declined them all. If I'm going to speak, she told Soren, I want to use my own voice. And she did. The first time she stepped into a public forum was at a panel discussion hosted by a local university's innovation incubator. The theme was Women in Systems Engineering. She wasn't the keynote. She wasn't even listed on the flyer. But when she walked to the mic during the Q&A session, the entire room leaned in. I didn't go to a fancy school, she said. I didn't come up through traditional programs, but I learned how to make things work when I had nothing but borrowed tools and second chances. Her words didn't rise or demand applause. They just landed. Solid. Clear. By the end of the event, people weren't asking for her resume. They were asking for her story. Not because she framed herself as extraordinary, but because she made struggle sound survivable and success sound possible without permission. Other invitations followed. Podcasts, seminars, roundtables. But she only accepted the ones that aligned with her purpose. I'm not here to perform gratitude, she told one organizer. I'm here to teach what I've learned, so someone else doesn't have to earn respect the hard way. She chose authenticity over polish every time. She wore the same boots, spoke with the same plain honesty. Her tone never tried to impress, but it always left people changed. And she never once mentioned Soren by name. Not because she was hiding him, because she was proving that she had always been enough, even before the world caught up. It wasn't about being saved. It was about being seen, on her terms, in her time. And this time, she wasn't going anywhere. It started with one workshop. Elira showed up at a transitional home for teen girls, many of them, survivors of abuse, some runaways, others aging out of foster care. She walked in with a milk crate full of broken circuit boards, old laptops, and hand tools she'd picked up from a surplus store. The program director had been skeptical. They're not exactly interested in wires and screwdrivers, she warned. Elira just smiled. They don't have to be. Not yet. That afternoon, she taught them how to open a hard drive without cracking the casing. How to recognize a power issue from a software. She didn't lecture. She invited. She demonstrated. She let them touch the tools. And they came alive. One girl fixed a dead speaker. Another repaired a fan motor with nothing but copper wire and patience. By the end of the second session, they were asking when Elira would be back. She kept coming. Word spread. With Soren's quiet financial backing, but never his interference, Elira launched something bigger. A mobile initiative with a name that felt like both mission and mirror. Fixer. It was simple at first. A traveling workshop hosted in community centers, shelters, and pop-up tech hubs. But it wasn't just about engineering. It was about reclaiming ownership over broken things, machines, opportunities, self-worth. The tagline was bold: "We don't just fix circuits, we rebuild confidence." She taught soldering, troubleshooting, how to read schematics. But more importantly, she taught how to walk into a room without shrinking. The girls responded not because she was polished, but because she was proof. They didn't see a mentor in high heels and flawless credentials. They saw someone who had once eaten out of the same food pantries, someone who'd slept under fluorescent lights and still figured out how to make a place for herself. Elira didn't pretend to have all the answers. She just gave them tools and reminded them that their hands were already enough. Fixer grew. Local tech companies offered to donate parts. Non-profits asked to partner. Volunteers signed up. And in every city they visited, another girl discovered she could build something that worked, starting with herself. They kept inviting her to talk. At first, it was local radio shows and online panels. Then, larger podcasts, tech summits, public service segments. Journalists wanted angles. They always did. The girl from the streets who saved $1 billion product. The rain-soaked intern who cracked the code. But Elira refused the headlines. She made her own. "I'm not here to be sensational," she said in one of her first interviews. "I'm here to remind you that homeless doesn't mean hopeless. That brilliance doesn't always come in the form you're trained to recognize." The interviewer blinked, clearly expecting a feel-good arc. What he got was truth. Elira didn't talk about rock bottom like a badge. She talked about it like a room too many people are forced to live in. A room most never escape because they don't get to explain the context of their choices, just the consequences. She wasn't bitter. She wasn't angry. She was exact. She spoke about how the shelter system failed to account for gifted youth, how caseworkers didn't know what to do with a girl who could rewrite operating systems but had nowhere to shower, how she carried job applications in plastic bags to keep them dry in the rain. People started listening differently, not with pity, but with respect. Her voice cut through the usual noise. It didn't beg for attention. It commanded it. Softly, firmly. She told stories, not statistics. Stories about how hunger shaped her discipline, how having nothing made her resourceful, how survival, while not ideal, taught her the kind of mental math no classroom ever offered. "I didn't come here to make you feel bad," she said during one tech leadership forum. "I came here to make you look again, at the person you step over on your way to brunch, at the girl fixing her backpack with zip ties in the back of the bus. She might be the engineer you're overlooking." The room was silent. She didn't want applause. She wanted awareness, and in that silence, she gave it to them, one story at a time. Growth wasn't always romantic. Sometimes it looked like staying late at the office to fix a line of code that no one else had the patience to touch. Sometimes it was her kicking off her boots by his door after a 12-hour volunteer day and falling asleep on the couch mid-sentence. Sometimes it was him remembering she liked her tea strong, even when she forgot to ask for it. Their lives started to weave, not into each other, but beside each other. Professionally, they kept things measured. She was her own force now. Soren didn't use her story for branding. He didn't put her on panels unless she asked. When people mentioned her in meetings, he let her speak for herself. At the company, her ideas started making it into product design. She introduced protocols that improved hardware sustainability and reduced repair costs. Less about flash, more about function. "Efficient," one exec said during a review. "No," Soren corrected gently. "Brilliant." They challenged each other in small ways. She questioned decisions others never did. He listened, sometimes reluctantly, but always completely. And outside the building, they became something softer. No grand declarations, no curated social posts, just shared playlists, handwritten notes tucked into each other's bags, nights spent cooking pasta from scratch even though both were terrible at it. She taught him how to slow down. He taught her how to take up space. There were disagreements, boundaries, pauses to recalibrate when the past bled too loudly into the present. But they always came back, to the bench near the pond, to the rooftop garden, to quiet walks with no destination. He wasn't trying to save her. She wasn't trying to disappear. They weren't perfect, but they were present. And every time she reached across the table during a working lunch or leaned into him after a long day, he knew, not everyone gets this. The chance to build something that isn't rushed, isn't performed, just real. Two lives, two paths, now walking the same direction, with no one needing to lead. Some days, success looked like a feature release hitting every benchmark. Other days, it looked like Elira leading a workshop full of girls who reminded her of versions of herself, curious, cautious, too used to being overlooked. But more often than not, it looked like the quiet moments in between. The mornings she walked into the office without lowering her eyes. The days she stood before a room full of polished professionals and didn't shrink. The nights she fell asleep on Soren's couch, surrounded by half-built prototypes, open notebooks, and empty tea mugs. There was no moment when she arrived, no spotlight she suddenly stood under. She simply kept choosing to show up, to try again, to speak when it was easier to stay silent, to build when walking away would have been more comfortable. And Soren, he stopped needing to prove anything. He no longer chased applause or headlines. He found fulfillment in watching his team grow, especially the ones who never thought they'd have a seat at the table. Especially the woman who had become his partner in every sense of the word. They didn't always agree. They didn't always know what came next, but they trusted each other enough to find out together. It wasn't about rescue. It wasn't about redemption. It was about redefining what it meant to matter, not by status, not by salary, but by impact, by truth, by consistency. Elira's past hadn't disappeared, but it no longer defined her. It informed her, guided her, kept her anchored even as she rose. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Soren watched her from across the rooftop garden. She was laughing with two interns she'd taken under her wing, pointing to their sketches with encouragement, not criticism. He smiled, not because she was his, but because she was hers, completely. And somehow, in learning to trust herself again, she had taught him how to do the same. It had been exactly 1 year since Elira walked into that startup accelerator, with a folded portfolio and a heart held together by thread. Now, she stood on the rooftop of that very same building, only this time she wasn't hidden in the corner. The sky wore that soft golden blush that came just before evening claimed the city. String lights zigzagged above the crowd, swaying gently with the breeze. Laughter rose like music from different pockets of people, founders, artists, engineers, investors, and girls, in oversized STEM t-shirts dancing in clusters. There was no velvet rope, no exclusive guest list, no special wristbands. Everyone belonged. Because this party wasn't about status, it was about what had grown, what had been rebuilt, what had been repaired. Elira moved through the garden with the ease of someone who had learned not just to survive, but to celebrate. Her curls were pinned loosely, her palms marked with smudges from setting up the lights herself, and her sandals were dusty from running around all morning. But her eyes were free. Nearby, Soren adjusted a speaker wire and traded a joke with one of the teen volunteers helping with sound check. He hadn't worn a suit, just a clean shirt, rolled sleeves, and that same quiet steadiness that made people feel safe. Their eyes met across the rooftop. He didn't move right away. Neither did she. Because when a whole year of rebuilding stares back at you, you take a second, you breathe it in. The people they'd once been wouldn't recognize this moment, wouldn't believe the rooftop that once watched them fall apart would one day hold them up. But it did, and now it held more than just them. Dozens of girls from community schools, most of whom had never touched a soldering iron before, were laughing beside tables full of interactive prototypes. There were student-led booths showcasing water filtration systems, solar lamps, low-cost medical kits. Fixer hadn't even launched publicly yet, But tonight, it lived, right here on this roof. Just as the sun began to slip behind the skyline, Soren turned and walked toward her, one hand tucked into his pocket, the other holding something that shimmered under the garden lights. He hadn't told anyone, but tonight was the night. Soren stopped a few steps in front of her. The music softened behind them, not because anyone planned it, just because moments like this seemed to ask the world to listen. A few people nearby noticed the shift in energy. Conversations slowed. Someone reached for a phone, then thought better of it. Elira tilted her head. "You okay?" she asked, half smiling. He nodded, though his chest felt tight in a way no boardroom ever caused. "I've been trying to find the right time," he said. "Turns out, there's no perfect one." She folded her arms loosely. "That sounds serious." "It is." He reached into his pocket, but didn't pull anything out yet. Instead, he looked at her, really looked at her. The woman who once fixed his car without asking his name. The woman who walked away when she could have stayed silent and small. The woman who rebuilt herself without asking permission. "I spent most of my life moving fast," he began, "always chasing the next goal, the next win, the next headline. I thought speed meant progress." Her expression softened, but she didn't interrupt. "Then you walked into my life," he continued, voice steady but quiet. "And you didn't rush, you didn't beg to be seen, you just were. And somehow that slowed everything down." He finally took the small velvet box from his pocket. "You helped me see life outside the fast lane," he said. "You showed me that building something meaningful doesn't require urgency, just intention." A few people gasped softly behind them. Elira's breath caught. Her hands dropped to her sides, fingers curling slightly like she needed to ground herself. Soren knelt. Not dramatically, not for show, just a simple movement, honest and certain. "I don't want to fix you," he said, "and I don't want you to fix me. I want to build with you. A life that's patient, a life that makes room for who we are, not who the world expects us to be." He opened the box. The ring wasn't oversized or flashy. It was elegant, thoughtful, chosen with care. "Elira," he said, voice barely above the rooftop breeze, "will you marry me?" The rooftop held its breath. For a few seconds, Elira couldn't speak. It wasn't just the proposal. It was everything behind it. The girl she used to be, the one who cried in the rain, clutching a blanket that didn't belong to her, never imagined anyone would kneel for her like this. But this wasn't a fantasy. This was earned. This was seen. She dropped to her knees too, not to mirror him, but because her body gave in to the flood of emotion. Her knees hit the grass, her hands pressed over her heart, and then she laughed. It started as a breathless release, like a valve unclenching after years of pressure. Then it turned into a warm, cracking sound, joy breaking through. "You're kneeling," she said, smiling, her voice thick with tears. "That's wild." Soren smiled back, still holding the ring, still steady. "You know I love you, right?" she asked. "Like, deeply. In all the versions of me, you somehow managed to see the one I was afraid to show, and you loved her anyway." "I do." She took a breath, then added, "But, just so we're clear, I still want the tools in the apartment. All of them." He blinked. "What?" "The drill, the level, the tiny box of screws you think are useless." Her eyes gleamed. "Because if I say yes, I get to keep fixing our furniture." He laughed then, breath catching in his throat, a ripple of relief, love, and amusement all at once. "Elira." "And not because it's broken," she said, touching his face now, "but because that's who I am. I don't just want things to work, I want them to feel like they belong." "Then yes," he said. "Keep fixing. Just stay." She finally nodded, voice small but clear. "Yes." He slid the ring onto her finger. It fit like it was waiting. From the crowd, someone clapped first, then another, then laughter. Cheers, tears. They stood together slowly, arms wrapping around each other in a way that didn't demand attention. It just deserved it. No grand kiss, no fireworks, just quiet smiles, a moment suspended in the rooftop air, and, beneath it all, the hum of a future that felt real. The applause rolled like gentle thunder across the rooftop, warm and unforced. Nobody had to be told this was a moment worth celebrating. It just was. Elira stood with Soren beneath the hanging lanterns, surrounded by people who had seen parts of their story. Some had known the beginning, others had come in halfway, but all of them felt like they were witnessing the ending of something broken, and the beginning of something healed. A friend handed Soren a glass of sparkling cider. Elira took hers with a little smirk. "No champagne," she teased. "We're keeping it safe," he grinned. "Last time you had wine, you tried to fix the railing with a spoon." They both burst into laughter, that kind of effortless joy that doesn't need punchlines to land. It just bubbles up because you're with someone who feels like home. The DJ in the corner played soft acoustic jazz, nothing loud or performative, just notes that floated like old memories, mixing with the scent of garden roses and grilled skewers from the buffet table. Kids ran through the low grass in the corner, their laughter like small fireworks. Somewhere, someone dropped a plate and gasped dramatically. It didn't matter. Nothing could steal from the moment. Julian made a toast. Short, sweet. To love, to patience, and to furniture that holds more than just weight, but history. That drew laughter from everyone, including Elira, who was now curled into Soren, his arm on a wooden bench, shoes off, head tilted back against his shoulder. He leaned close. "You okay?" She nodded. "More than okay. I feel like we didn't just find each other. We found a way to stay." The music shifted. Slower now. Someone pulled out a guitar, and suddenly it felt like a porch gathering instead of a formal party. People sang along softly, not always on key, but always from the heart. Soren turned to her. "You want to dance?" Elira looked around, at the mismatched lights, the friends clinking cups, the flowers she helped grow in this rooftop space, and then back at the man who never walked away. "No," she whispered. He raised an eyebrow. "I just want to sit with you, like this, while everything good finally feels real." So, they stayed like that, still, together, not needing to perform, not needing to prove, just being. Months later, in a sunlit hall that once hosted charity auctions and forgotten fundraisers, a new kind of gathering bloomed. No velvet ropes, no VIP lists, just folding chairs, toolkits and girls, dozens of them, some from shelters, others from high schools, trade programs and community centers, all wide-eyed, all curious, all seen. At the front stood a banner, "Fixer, where hands learn to build and hearts learn they matter." Elira stepped onto the small platform, not in heels, in sneakers worn from days of prep. She glanced toward the back of the room, where Soren stood beside a whiteboard, helping a group arrange soldering kits and motherboards. She cleared her throat. "Welcome," she began, her voice steady, warm. "You may have been told you don't belong in tech, in engineering, in innovation, that you're too soft, too poor, too broken, that your hands weren't made to build, that your stories didn't count." A pause. "But today, we start unlearning all of that." The girls leaned in, some holding pens like weapons against everything they were ever told not to dream. "This program isn't just about fixing machines," Elira continued. "It's about fixing beliefs, the ones that say girls can't lead, that being homeless means you'll never be housed in hope again, that because you fell, you can't fly." Applause swelled. It wasn't polite, it was personal. Soren stepped beside her. "We'll be learning together, failing together, laughing, building, designing futures that don't wait for permission." A young girl raised her hand. "Will we really get to build stuff?" Elira smiled. "Yes. And break some stuff too. That's part of it." Laughter broke out, light and honest. Later that afternoon, as they passed around sketchbooks and screwdrivers, someone asked how the idea started. Soren didn't answer. He just looked at Elira. She whispered, "In the rain." And, just like that, the story settled into legacy. The final shot of the video script pans out, the hall glowing with afternoon light, girls building circuit boards, mentors guiding quietly, and at the center, Elira and Soren, not perfect, not polished, but deeply rooted. Their story, once hidden behind closed doors, now opened 1,000 windows for others. If this story reminded you that love is more than a label, and that second chances are sacred, please like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. We've got more stories that might just fix something in you too.